if I could confine myself to your first philosophical argument, though I think the objection applies to the second as well. We normally suppose that during the course of my first sentence I've uttered, an infinite number of events have occurred. The first last half a second, the next last a quarter of a second, and so on. And if that was indeed an infinite series of actual events, then, of course, you would be confronted with a reductio ad absurdum.
Yes.
So what you are saying is that it's not an actual series of events, it's only a potential series.
Right.
Now, how would you distinguish between a potential and an actual series? Because it seems to me that for each of those events, if, for example, there was a particle moving with a constant velocity during that time, for each of the moments picked out by those, at the beginning or end of those events, there would be a particular position occupied by that particle, which, if it hadn't occupied it at that time, then it would never have moved continuously. So how would you, it seems to me fairly obvious that they are actual events. And therefore, what does the claim that there cannot be an actual event, series of events, amount to? Now, it seems to me that you are relying on the assumption that we can make a distinction between a universe which has an actual series of events preceding the present moment and one that doesn't.
Yes.
And it seems to me the only way we could do that is by talking of an actual series of events of the same finite length, that is to say, an hour. That.
Yes.
Now that therefore makes a distinction between a universe which has an actual series of these going back and actually doesn't. But it seems to me it wouldn't distinguish between a universe which had a beginning and a universe that doesn't have a beginning, not for Grunbaum's reason, but for a quite different reason. That is to say, suppose there is a universe which has a finite series of events back to a certain point. Now, one can only distinguish between a finite and an infinite series of events, or one can only talk of an event lasting a certain time if you have a system of clocks, potentially, which you can establish. And you can only have a system of clocks in a universe which is orderly and non-chaotic. Now, suppose there was a finite series of events back to a moment of time before which there was chaos, and before that there was nothing. Now, is this that universe would have had a beginning, although by the criterion of lasting, not in virtue of the criterion of lasting only a finite number of events, but in virtue of the criterion of nothing existing before that. And it seems to me that's the only way to distinguish between a beginning and a non-beginning universe, and you are implicitly appealing to the notion of finite length, which only applies to certain sorts of universes. So there's enough objectives.
It seems
to me, Richard.
Richard, that there are two issues there that have been raised. Let me speak to each in turn. First, with respect to the difference between the potential and actual infinite, conceptually, we can distinguish between these by saying that the notion of a potential infinite is a limit concept. It is not a number. It is a limit which one endlessly approaches but never arrives at. So when I divide a finite distance in half and then in fourth and then in eighths, 16th, this is potentially infinite in the sense that infinity serves as a limit to that process, but I will never actually reach an infinity-th division. By contrast, in an actual infinite, you have a collection which has a definite and determinate number of definite and discrete members. And these are such that a proper part of that collection has the same number of members of the same cardinality as the whole collection. And that serves to distinguish, at least conceptually, I think, the idea of actual from potential infinite. With regard to the specific example about the continuity of space and time, here I'm persuaded that regarding space and time as continuous is a result of the human mathematization of time and space. We have a model of continuous manifolds, which we then impose upon space and time to do our scientific work, and this kind of model works very well. But as you know, a good many quantum theorists think that ultimately reality isn't really to be described in that sort of continuous way. These are, as it were, useful fictions, and we shouldn't be misled into thinking that a line is actually composed of an infinite number of points. Rather, on an Aristotelian view, such as I would want to endorse, the line as a whole is logically prior to any parts, or points rather, that we would choose to denominate in it. It is not a composition of points. Rather, the line is logically prior to the points that we will pick out on it. And I think that's a coherent model of space and time that won't involve commitment to either continuous instants or points, or on the other hand, to discrete quanta of time and space. It would just say that these are the results of our mathematical imposition of modeling time and space. Now, the second question is one that I've dealt with in my trilogy. You are correct in saying that technically the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't really prove the beginning of time. What it proves is the beginning of metric time, that there cannot be an actually infinite number of arbitrary but equal non-zero finite intervals regressing into the past. And so the question arises, before clocks existed, before we had the expanding universe, did God literally exist before the universe in a non-metric time? And the Kalam argument is consistent with that hypothesis. If you are persuaded that, as you put it in one of your books, at the first moment of time it was true that there were swans or there were not swans prior to this moment, that implies there was a prior moment at which God existed. And this argument's consistent with that. I myself would disagree with you and Lucas and Alan Padgett on your...
This is a test of the personnel alerting system.
You...
This is a test of the personnel alerting system. This is only a test.
All people leave the hotel.
Okay, now we'll just start all over and repeat all that.
Just with this sentence, that I give arguments against the metric conventionalism that I think you and Lucas and Padgett presuppose for your view. So while your view is, I think, a legitimate and compatible option with what I've shared, in the end, I opt for God being simply timeless sans the universe.